Hi, everybody. I just finished the new book, I Believe, Help My Unbelief by Veli-Matti Karkkainen. It was published by Cascade Books. I want to say thank you to Cascade Whitfinstock for sending me a review copy. This is my honest take on this book, and I'm going to take you through my typical format of the main idea of the book, the research behind it, the readability of the style, and then some of my general reactions to it kind of as a whole. So this book really, the positioning of this book really intrigued me. I was somewhat familiar with the author from some reading I had to do in seminary. He has always struck me as someone who's very globally minded in terms of theological understanding. And I was really intrigued by the positioning of this book as a Christian, as kind of an explanation of Christian doctrine in a blatantly pluralistic and increasingly secularized setting. I was intrigued by just the positioning of that book, or the positioning of the idea at least. So that's why I wanted to review this. But what this book is there's a few surprising things about what this book is. It is kind of a systematic theology, like it's systematic in the logical progression of the chapters. So it just and each chapter is just a doctrinal concept. So like it starts with the concept of revelation, like how do we even have knowledge about God in general, and then it moves through very what you would consider typical kind of Christian doctrinal ideas. Doctrines about God, doctrines about atonement, about salvation, about eschatology, about creation, all these things. But it works through them. It builds. There's doctrine about the Holy Spirit and pneumatology. It works through in a systematic sense. It builds off of revelation to kind of each plank kind of builds a full theological case, I suppose. And each chapter is unapologetically presenting the Christian understanding of that doctrine, that doctrinal topic, the doctrinal idea. But none of what I just said is surprising or interesting. There's a bajillion systematic theology texts. But what is interesting about this book is that pluralistic global kind of understanding that Karkkainen is bringing to his whole project. And so what, in my view, sets this book apart is its intentional attempt to be in conversation with other quote-unquote living faiths in the globe. And so each chapter, after presenting the basics of the Christian proposal, then presents the basics of that same idea from a Buddhist perspective, from an Islamic perspective, from a Hindu perspective, and from a Jewish perspective. So those are the four kind of living faiths that he interacts with in each chapter. And he really goes to some pains to present and it's not a combative, polemic, apologetic argument. It's more of okay, here's what Christians think about this doctrine. What does a Buddhist think about this doctrine, generally speaking? And then he presents all four of those faiths in each chapter, and then compares them. Here are some points of overlap, and here are some points of divergence between Christianity and these other faiths. And he does that for each chapter that moves through. That, to me, there might be other books like this. There's a book by Timothy Tennant which I love that book. I love this book by Tennant called The Theology in the Context of World Christianity. It's a fantastic book. That is a little bit like this, but I still don't know of any other book that I'm aware of that does the same thing in its organization and its structure, and in just, like I said, systematically working through doctrines and intentionally putting them in conversation with those four faiths specifically. And the idea is the whole idea of the project is how do we talk about with grace and good information, how do we talk about these prominent religions in a world that's increasingly globalized, and that these ideas are kind of bumping up against each other more and more and more in our cultural moment, at least as of 2024, and I'm recording this. So that's kind of what I believe Help My Unbelief is about. It's a presentation of Christian ideas on a pretty basic level, actually, and then putting those ideas in conversation with the other faiths that I mentioned. That all being said, the research is an interesting question. Like how well researched is this book? Man, and there's a couple things I want to say about this. I'm going to come back to this point in a little bit, but it's a fairly, on the Christian, well, I guess in all of it, it's a fairly intro level book, actually. Like, it's a pretty, dare I say, basic presentation of doctrinal ideas. It's not doing anything particularly creative or innovative or deep with any particular doctrine. It's really presenting, here is the basic definition, and here are some different ways some theologians have gotten at this particular idea of revelation. For example, here's how it's come up in Christian history and broad Christian traditions, but it's kept very intro level. So that being said, it's hard to categorize the research in a way. It's, on one hand, it's very well researched because it's broad. I mean, and he has a, and this is my perception of him in general as a thinker, is that he has a broad command of a lot of different literature, and so he has a zoomed out, big, global, historic view of these doctrines, and he can address a wide range of kind of tradition. Even within Christianity, he can address a wide range of, there's a good bit of quoting from Catholic sources, for example, whether they're cyclicals from the popes or whatever, and teachings from the Second Vatican Council. Like, as a Protestant, the author's Protestant, he does a really good job, I think, quoting from primary Catholic sources. For example, he also does a wide range of presenting Protestant ideas, and including the Eastern and Western traditions within Christianity. It's very wide. And the other wide aspect of it is obviously those other religions. And I am not well read in Buddhist texts, for example, by any means. Certainly not. I mean, Hinduism is the one that I was the least familiar with going into this book in particular. From my layperson, so to speak, perspective, I felt like he did a really fair and good job at quoting from primary texts in these religious traditions, and he does, at least tonally, does a good job at not setting up weak arguments or straw men. He really does seem to be trying to represent a very solid and fair perspective on each of these other living faiths, and that includes primary quotations from primary texts in these other traditions. And I thought I was impressed with that. I thought, wow, he's really read such a wide, broad range of sources, and he's kind of brought them all in synthesis into this project. So wide is the term I keep coming back to, wide research. Now the readability of it. I already mentioned this. It really is an intro level text. I've said that a few times. It's extremely easy to read from the perspective of, I could see a freshman world religions class, like an undergraduate freshman world religions class, using this book. I think this would be a great book for an experience like that, actually, because it's really easy to read stylistically, page for page, chapter for chapter. It's actually quite well positioned for someone who hasn't done like any reading in doctrine or theology in general, but someone who might be interested in world religions or philosophy. I mean, when he breaks down concepts like revelation or salvation or eschatology, I mean, it's very, very straightforward, and it's very easy to grasp. So that for me is a two-edged sword, because for me and for the kind of reading I like to do, I found it almost, dare I say, too simple or too accessible or too intro level, in the sense that it kind of had a hard time holding my attention in a lot of those sections because it was so kind of basic. And I'm trying to like couch that sounds like a critique, and I guess it is of a sense, but it's really a critique depending on what kind of book you're looking for. And for me, I was looking for something a little bit more, well, I don't know if I was looking for this, or I don't know what to expect, but I prefer to read more interesting, creative theology. This is very much a basic intro to a lot of these concepts. Now, again, this is why it's a two-edged thing, because that all being said, I'm very well read in the Christian doctrine. I'm not well read in those other traditions at all. And so when I got to the sections that we're discussing, like here's how the Hindu faith, here's how Hindu texts talk about revelation, or how we can even understand God, or even what's the Hindu approach towards their holy scriptures. That stuff I clicked back in because I thought, wow, this is really interesting and really helpful, because I have no clue. And he does a really good job at, he doesn't lump Buddhism simplistically into a monolith. He does a really good job at, I think, trying to differentiate the different streams and traditions within Buddhism without getting too bogged down by it. I think he does a very fair job at presenting Islamic and Jewish ideas that overlap quite significantly with Christian ideas, but do diverge at key points. So when at the end of each chapter, when he got into those conversations with other faiths, I found it much more engaging for my kind of interest level and my experience of reading different types of theology. And so I had this back and forth where, when I was reading the basic presentations of the Christian ideas, I kind of found it like just was trying to get through it. But then when I got to those other sections in each chapter, it felt really engaging to me. So yeah, I'm just trying to put out my reading experience here to you, because that will hopefully give you a sense as to whether or not this would be a really helpful book for you or a friend of yours or something. Because, and that'll get into my basic reaction now. I'll get into my reaction. I've already tipped my hand a lot of this stuff, but I think first of all, I do think this book is really unique. I don't know of another systematic book that's so logically organized and clearly written that interacts so clearly and fairly with the other major faiths in the globe, and that has such a broad view. And it's a longish book. It's in the 400-page range, but it's not. It didn't feel like a super long book to me because it's so accessibly written, and because of how much ground he covers. I mean, that's like, this could easily have been a 1,200+ page book, but he does it in a relatively compact space. So I really appreciated that. And it is, like I said, very unique. I think it's uniquely positioned, and I think this could be a very unique resource for some certain types of people who are interested in religion broadly. That being said, it wasn't my favorite reading experience for all the reasons I just mentioned in the readability category. I found the intro level approach almost too intro. There wasn't much. That's not to say, like, the chapter that was on the doctrine of sin, I thought there were a few really interesting pages that he kind of brought in some helpful treatments of sin from more of an Eastern perspective that is not always on my mind as a culturally Western person. So it's not to say there was nothing interesting in those pages, but I generally found it to be quite a bit rote and repetitive of a lot of stuff I've already read, because I just spend my time reading theology, and especially Christian theology. So that was it was a little bit hard to get through in terms of just engagement and interest, but that's tempered by the like really interesting pages at the end of each chapter that got into those other faiths. So it was a little bit of a push and pull for me. So again, I'm just trying to articulate my experience reading this book. I want to give you a good informed sense of whether or not you want to spend time with this one, because I can see, and this is what I want to end this review on, I can see this book being an extraordinary resource for certain types of people. Like I mentioned, the undergraduate freshman world religions class, something like that. Like, I think this is an amazing book for something like that, because it is so broad, it's so fair, it's so easy to read, and it I think just interacts with other traditions in a really pretty unique way. But it's not exactly the kind of thing for me. I wanted a little bit more meat, a little bit more grit, a little bit more challenge from particularly the Christian theological content. So a little bit of a push and pull reaction for me. I still appreciate this book. I think it accomplishes his goal, and in a relatively short page count. It just may not be exactly kind of the book for me, or the book I was looking for right now. So those are my thoughts on I Believe, Help My Unbelief, published by Cascade. If you are someone who just wants a wide intro level kind of discussion of basically all of Christian doctrine and how it sets itself apart from other living faiths, then man, this is going to be, you should go buy this, go read it. But if you're a little bit more like me, a little bit more deep in the weeds on some of that stuff, there might be other resources that'll be a better fit for you. I don't know, it's hard for me to tell. Your mileage is going to vary based on hopefully everything I said. You can discern what you want to do. But those are my thoughts. So as always, thank you for taking some time to watch.